We've got quite a lot of people here. I'd like to welcome everyone. First, I'd like to ask everyone to please mute themselves, okay? Later on, there will be an opportunity after the workshop to ask questions. And the format for that is either to put your question in the chat. We will be monitoring that. So if you put it in the chat, we will absolutely ask that question on your behalf. Or you can raise your hand and we will be sure to, we'll be monitoring, you know, the screen and call upon you.
Button.
So again, if you can mute yourselves now, this is a good time to do it because I'm hearing voices. And anyway, I would like to welcome you all here. I'm Pam Kingsley. I am the chair of the Town of Poughkeepsie CAC. This is the third in our workshop series that started in January called It Takes a Town. These are a series of presentations / workshops where we focus on issues that have to do with the environment on a local level. And today we are thrilled to pieces to be focusing on pollinator pathways. And this is an initiative of one of our members, Susan Carnes-Hecht, who also happens to be the chair of the Climate Smart Task Force for the Town of Poughkeepsie. This has blossomed into something absolutely amazing and astounding, and honestly, it's all because of Susan. So on that note, I'm going to hand the meeting over to Susan, and Susan will take it from there. So thank you, and I'm so glad to see everyone here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Pam, for the shout out. And really, I have to give credit to a totally different friend of mine who lives down in Phillipstown. Someone I know from a totally different organization called Citizens Climate Lobby. And one day she had a Facebook post of a pollinator garden that she was building at her home. And she had this little medallion that said, this property is on the pollinator pathway. And I asked her what that was, and she told me, and I went to the website, and the rest, as they say, is history. Very, very excited. We've been looking forward to tonight to sort of be the official launch of this project in the town and at this point in the county. I really want to welcome all of you. There are so many people here tonight from other towns. I've been in contact with a lot of you over the last couple of months, Zoom meetings, phone calls. I'm very, very gratified at how many other towns really want to get involved in creating a county-wide collaboration. And I know we have Ithaca here, so at this point we are becoming statewide, which is pretty cool. This local effort has been ramping up for several months. There are a lot of people involved. So after we hear from our presenter tonight, I will come back in. I'll tell you a little bit about where we are in our local journey. So at this point, I am very, very pleased to welcome Chet Kerr. He is one of the folks from the Northeast Pollinator Pathway that has provided so much guidance to us over the past several months, along with his partner in crime, Louise Washer. And if any of you know anything about the pathway, you know she's also very involved. And one of the things I really love about getting to know Chet is that, like me, he came around to a love of environmental work after a long career in a completely unrelated area. So after practicing law in the city for over 30 years, Chet left his law firm to do new and different things. He's currently a member of the Pollinator Pathway Northeast Steering Committee, and he is the head of the Irvington, New York Pathway. And he has been really instrumental in helping spread the pathway to a lot of the river towns along the Hudson. And in addition to his work on the pathway, Chet teaches, he works on civil rights and criminal justice reform issues, and he serves on a variety of boards, including the Greater Irvington Land Trust, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and the Irvington Historical Society. So I'd like to welcome Chet. I'm going to mute myself, and I know he's going to share a PowerPoint. And when he's done, I'll tell you a little bit about the local effort, show you a couple other things, and then we'll be thrilled to take your questions. Thank you, Chet, for being here.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight and giving me a chance to talk a little bit about the Pollinator Pathway Project, what it's done down here and what it's doing across New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts and New Jersey. And get you guys hopefully excited about this project, because I think, as you'll hear, it has proven to be a really, really effective tool to get people engaged on these issues, which is just great. So what I'm going to do
I
is,
just want to interrupt right here. I want everyone to double check that they are muted because I'm hearing some background noise. Sorry about that.
it's okay. It's okay. That's okay. It happens all the time. I'm going to do a short little slide presentation, just a little bit about the background and the scope and the principles of the pollinator pathway. And then I thought I might just share a few ideas about how we got it started down here and what it's meant and how it's grown. And then, I can answer any questions that come up, as Susan suggested at the end. So let me start by see if I can share my screens successfully. Is everyone seeing that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So again, this is kind of an overview of the ideas behind the pollinator pathway, and just a little bit of background before I start. This is a project that began in southwestern Connecticut in 2017 by a couple of folks in Weston and Ridgefield who were interested in landowner engagement. They were involved with conservancy foundations and wanted to find a way of reaching out to landowners so they could speak to them about land conservation, but also just get them interested in environmental issues. And as you'll hear, it has taken a life on of its own. It has proven to be both a very effective tool for engaging, but it's also allowed a lot of different interests, environmental interests and organizations in villages and towns all across the states to bring to bear a lot of new energy about dealing with what is a very serious but fun environmental issue that we'll talk about. So let me just get started. Why is this not working? So what is a pollinator pathway? I kind of define it as corridors of private and public properties that provide pesticide-free native plant habitat and nutrition for pollinators. And what it does is it tries to connect various parcels that in various communities, so they're not isolated. And that allows pollinators who have different ranges that they use to look for food, to move from place to place and find foods and propagate and expand. And so as these pollinator gardens pop up, that allows all of these pollinators to move from community to community to community. And we can reconnect our landscape by making our properties stepping stones for the free flow of species across a healthy and native landscape. And I live down in Irvington, which is just below Terrytown along the river. And while we're a pretty mature community, there's a lot of different kind of landscapes that are here. People have their properties. And as you'll hear later on, what I think we've done very successfully is trying to get educating people about what they can do in their own properties to provide this connected habitat for pollinators across our community. So why do this? Well, the reality is that a lot of insect population is under real challenge right now. Monarch populations are down 90% in the last 20 years. The West Coast monarch populations are down 97% since 1983. The overwinter colony loss for honeybees is 30% over the last 10 years. Bumblebees are in decline. 46% of European bumblebees are declining and are threatened with extinction. And even as far away as Germany, there's been a real decline in flying insects. And so why does this matter? Why do we care about insects? And they are essentially a fundamental component of our food chain between plants, insects and invertebrates and other animals, and ultimately our food chain. And they are an essential component of keeping our environment vibrant and healthy. And just as an example, the bee diversity in Connecticut, there are 349 species of bees that have been recorded in Connecticut. 9 species are exotic, but the rest are all native to the United States. There's 1 species of honeybee, it's an exotic, 16 species of bumblebees, and then a large number of solitary bees that don't live in hives but live in the ground. And there's many species, and their diversity is what ensures plant life stays healthy and diverse in our community. But these bees and a lot of other pollinators are under threat. And there's a lot of reasons for this threat. One of them is the loss and fragmentation of our landscape. There are places where there's asphalt, or as you'll see the picture on the right, grasses, lawns. And while that image of a lawn looks very pretty to a kind of a suburban type of mind, it is actually a barren landscape for most insects and invertebrates, because it doesn't provide them a healthy habitat, both for food or, more importantly, for reproduction. And other threats to pollinators are pesticides and lawn chemicals. They present a real challenge for insects, and are probably one large reason for the decline in insects over the last 50 to 60 years. Another important threat to pollinators are invasive plants, landscapes that lack native plants. So why is that important? And this is something that I have learned as I've gotten involved with this, and that is the complex relationship between pollinators, butterflies, moths, bees, and other types of pollinators, and specific plants, plants that are native to a certain biosphere, where over time, those plants and the insects have developed a relationship that allows them to feed off those plants and reproduce in those plants. And if you don't have those native plants there, a wide swath of insects cannot survive. They can't reproduce, they can't feed. And one way that native plants get pushed out are invasive plants, plants that are from outside of the country, that grow very broadly and take over our landscape. But they do not support pollinators. Other threats are climate change. Obviously, the changes in temperatures can throw off the seasons of hibernation and when plants come out and when insects can feed off plants. And another issue is light pollution. Light during the evening disrupts moths and a lot of other pollinators that operate in the evening, and that's also undermines their habitat and their control. So the story of the pollinator pathway and how this all got started. As I said, it began in Southwest Connecticut. There are some folks in Wilton and Ridgefield who decided that they wanted to reach out to landowners, and one thing they would do is they decided to sell dogwood trees, native dogwood trees. And this was a way to just allow them to introduce themselves to landowners. But they quickly discovered that native dogwood trees are actually an effective support system for pollinators. And having realized that and made that connection, they launched the pollinator pathway in Wilton and Ridgefield in 2017. And when I started it here in Irvington in 2018, I was the only community in southern Westchester that had a pollinator pathway. And there was one other in northern Westchester in North Salem. There were maybe 10 communities in Connecticut. And today, there are over 238 towns in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and a couple of other states that have active pollinator pathway projects going on. So it's really taken off, and it's proven to be, as I said, a wonderful way of getting community engagement. A nice thing about the pollinator pathway, it's a very scalable model. It works in a very small space, like container gardens. It can work in individual people's yards. People can become engaged by planting native plants in small areas in their yards without having to rip up all of their existing landscape. It can grow to pollinator gardens. A number of communities have started pollinator gardens that are larger and bigger and that bring in more of the community. Communities have also started demonstration sites where they have really highlighted different native plants. In our community here in Irvington, we have a nature center called the O'Hara Nature Center. And about 4 years ago, our village built out about 8 or 9 demonstration gardens in the O'Hara Nature Center, where they planted a wide range of native plants that work in different types of environments. That nature center has now grown substantially. It is on the top of a large park of woods, and it has become a very vibrant part of our town, our village, in bringing real education to the village and a real place for people to come and understand and learn about pollinators and the broader ecosystems. And then I think another larger way of doing it is just restoration sites. One of the great things about Pollinator Pathway is creating meadows, taking back space that has been taken over by landscape lawns or large parks or whatever, and letting it go wild again, back to traditional meadows with traditional native plants that grew there many years ago. In many ways, meadows are the original pollinator gardens and become a great way of creating vistas and tremendous pollinator-friendly environments within communities in a really beautiful and nice way. So the message is simple. At the landowner level, it's rethink your lawn, reduce the size of your lawn, mow less, and use organic lawn care practices, not pesticides. 2, planting native plants. Native plants bring the pollinators and the birds and increase the biological diversity of your land. And I'll just say from a personal point of view, this is really true. As Susan said, I was a lawyer for many years and commuted into the city, and I was not a gardener. I had no concept of how to garden. And since getting involved with this, I have really tried to take on our yard and plant native plants. And I have discovered, much to my enjoyment, and is that it really does draw in pollinators. I see so many insects and butterflies and bees that I didn't see before, because I now have an environment that supports them, both from terms of nectar and food and for reproduction. The third item is avoid pesticides. Pesticides negatively impact the health of us all, not just the invertebrates, the pollinators, but it can infect our pets, it can affect our children, and affect us, infect our water supply. And to the extent we can, we really try to promote to not use pesticides and use organic land care instead. So another important issue is the loss of plant diversity. As I said, the biggest crop, one of the biggest, America's biggest crops are lawns. And this is a map that shows the amount of lawns across the country. You'll see a lot of the municipal larger cities have large lawns. And, you know, I live in a suburban community, and I grew up in a suburban community outside Chicago, and always looked at lawns and thought they were very nice and clean and whatever. But they're deserts. They don't support native, if they don't have native plants, then they don't support pollinators and don't provide a healthy environment. And so what you often see is kind of the visually most kind of well supported suburban communities are actually not the most healthy communities. And rethinking your aesthetics and rethinking your view of what makes a healthy environment, a lot of it is rethinking what the role is of lawns and how to change that. So why are lawns causing the problems? Well, as I said, they provide little or no supportive habitat. The pollinators need specific plants, specifically native plants, to both obtain food and reproduce. And just turf grass doesn't provide that. Often lawns require fertilizer and pesticides, which are toxins to both the animal life and to wetlands, streams, and rivers, and the Long Island Sound near where I live. And their root systems are too shallow to effectively filter stormwater runoff. And homeowners, again, I live in a community where a lot of people either they mow their lawns or they hire a landscaping service. They don't really think about what they're doing. And they just routinely put down fertilizers and pesticides because it makes their lawns grow green and thick and rich. not realizing that by doing that, they are destroying other parts of the natural environment that make up much of our environment in our communities. And that is really destructive. And as I say, pesticides can really affect our water, and then lawns require a lot of water and a lot of use of water. And again, this is in Fairfield County, Connecticut. 40% of water is used outdoors in lower Fairfield County, largely to water lawns and grassland. And in the summer, that number jumps to 70%, according to a local water company. Yards with irrigation systems use 40% more water than yards that don't have irrigation systems. And nationally, lawns suck up 9 billion gallons of water per day, according to the EPA. And just as a kind of an example of, you see the effect of this, Greenwich, Connecticut went from using 30 million gallons per day to only using 5 million gallons per day when irrigation was banned during the 2016 drought. So you can really see, when you have that kind of event that changes practice within a community, the dramatic effect it has on water usage. So to the extent we're thinking and worrying about water usage, why is mine? It can be dramatically changed by the fact we all have lawns. So rethinking your lawn. And so how do you do that? Mow less frequency, only every 2 to 3 weeks. And that makes your lawn grow a little bit more, but that's okay. It doesn't, again, it's more of an aesthetic thing than anything else. Reduce the size by adding shrubs, trees, or a pollinator garden or clover, by putting in native shrubs and native trees. Let part of your yard go natural. Wildflowers will likely appear. You're creating a mini meadow. Avoid pesticides. And another important thing about yards is leave the leaves that fall in the fall and clean them up later. That is really an important part of sustainability in your yard. A lot of pollinators, especially solitary bees and other types of insects, hibernate over the year, and they need over the winter, and they need leaves and shrubs and fallen sticks in which to do that. And if you routinely clean your garden up so it looks all pristine at the end of the fall, you rob them of that habitat for going over the winter. Another thing is to go electric in terms of how you clear up your yard. I don't know up in Poughkeepsie, but down here in Westchester, there is a ongoing and very active debate about gas-powered lawn blowers and use of them in communities. And our community actually bans them during the summer and is going to go to a full ban of them in 2023. Some of that is because of the pollution they provide. Some of that is because of the noise, but they also, the power of gas-powered leaf blowers is that they blow away the topsoil and they blow away a lot of the organic material that are supportive of pollinators. And it is very destructive, again, to use them if you're trying to promote a healthy environment for pollinators. So just an example, here's an example of Cape Elizabeth in Children's Garden in Portland, Maine. On the left is what it looked like for many, many years, this kind of beautiful grass slope, very pretty, a nice walk along. But then they transformed that into what became a pollinator meadow, and with a real diversity of blooms, diversity of heights, and a healthy environment for pollinators in a way that makes it a much healthier environment overall. And then this is a transformation of just a lot in Stamford, Connecticut. Again, you can see on the left, they had taken out parts of the lawn that would otherwise be a green lawn, and they put in pollinator plants, pollinator shrubs, and it's a different look, it's a different feel, but by doing that, they've now created a healthier environment for that kind of stepping stone for pollinators to move through the community in a really positive way, and which is very important. So as I said, another important issue is avoid pesticides. Planting for pollinators and then spraying creates an ecological trap. And if you see on the right, I'm not sure what that plant is, but the circle around it is a bee up there. But if somebody has now sprayed this with pesticides, and that bee comes and feeds off those plants, that those pesticides could impact that bee and kill it. And so if you created this environment by putting in native plants that will attract pollinators, but then you spray it with pesticides to control the weeds, that in turn will impact your pollinators. So not using pesticides or avoiding their use as much as possible is a really, really important thing to do as you think about protecting pollinators. And instead of pesticides and chemical fertilizers, take other strategies. One of the big issues down here, and I'm sure up there, is ticks. And so people are very concerned about ticks, but you can spray yourself and not your yard to help you address ticks. Remove the kind of plants that support ticks. Japanese barberry, which is an invasive plant, is a real harbinger to support ticks. I actually just pulled one out of my yard the other day. Use ticks boxes instead of sprays. Plant native plants to attract beneficial insects, and go organic, but do it carefully. And again, I think by being smart about how you use sustainable practices, you can really find that you can have an effective and beautiful landscape while avoiding chemical pesticides. So this is the change we're working for: stopping pesticide application, putting in native plants, and putting in organic pesticide-free practices on your lawn. And then the third element of the pollinator pathway is planting native plants. There's a wide range of available native plants that support different individual insects. One of the challenges down here, several years ago, was finding native plants. A lot of nurseries weren't supplying them. You go to Home Depot and you look at all the plants there, many of them are not native plants. But a number of the nurseries are getting religion on this, and in part because consumers are recognizing the importance of this and are asking their nurseries to provide native plants and make them available. And down here, at least, there's now a number of nurseries that are making them widely available. One thing Westchester is doing is Westchester's just started a project called Planting Westchester to supply, create a website that provides information to citizens all across Westchester about a number of sustainable lawn practices. I'm actually on the Native Plants Committee of that. And one part of what the information we're putting up is on nurseries throughout Westchester and the surrounding areas that provide access to native plants as a way of making sure people have a place to go to get them. So why native plants? Why, again, I started off that they're important. And I don't know if many of you know who Doug Tallamy is, but Doug Tallamy is a professor, I think, in Maryland. And he wrote a book, Bringing Nature Home, which is kind of the Bible to all of this, because he really goes through with real rigor and detail about the relationship between pollinators and native plants and why that relationship is so important. And why it's important to have native plants that support pollinators. And an example of two types of dogwood. There's a native dogwood, and it supports an entire food web and is host to the spring azure butterfly. That dogwood, if you have it in your property, will provide support for birds, for different pollinators, and is actually a host plant for, as I said, the azure butterfly. The Japanese dogwood, which is another common dogwood you find around here, plays host to no North American pollinator. It's a food source to monkeys in Japan, but that's about it. And so a lot of these plants were brought over here by the gardening community many, many years ago. And while they're very pretty plants and are often used in gardens to make them look visually beautiful, they actually do not support the environment we have, don't support the pollinators that live in our region, and provide no benefit to our environment in any way. So another thing to think about are trees. And if you often you think about pollinators, you think about plants, you think about beautiful flowers and whatever. But trees are actually some of the most important pollinators support systems around. They're kind of as this is a Doug Tallamy concept. They're meadows in the sky. And a good example is the oak tree. The oak tree supports over 590 different types of pollinators, of insects of all different types that use it for food and reproduction. And having an oak tree in your property is tremendous in terms of supporting this effort. Having other types of trees, non-native trees such as a Norway maple, provides no support for pollinators in our region. And therefore, thinking about the trees you have, and if you're going to be planting new trees, thinking about what are the native trees that support pollinators are important as you think about your yard. And on the right is a list of sample trees that flower and provide different bloom time. This is a sample list that's available on the pollinatorpathway.org website that Susan mentioned. And another thing to think about shrubs. Shrubs are a very important part of native shrubs are an important part of supporting pollinators. And an example are queen bumblebees. Queen bumblebees come out in the early spring, and they have to then create a new hive, and they look to native shrubs to provide them early spring nutrients and sources of nutrients, and then throughout the entire season. And these are all different kinds of shrubs that can do that you can plant in your yard. And so thinking about if you're going to replace shrubs or add shrubs to your yard, thinking about which of them are native and which of them support pollinators is a wonderful way of enhancing your environment. So what else do pollinators need? And as I mentioned, one of the really important things is nectar and pollen from native plants, native larval host plants in trees like milkweed, which supports the monarch butterfly, white oak. They need fresh water. They need dirt patches for ground nesting, but they need leaves, especially leaves and snags and old wood over winter. And so one of the things that is an important part of this effort is to get people to think about mulching their leaves and leaving them either on their lawn, or mulching their leaves and leaving them on their garden beds over the winter. Don't clean up your garden beds, but let the leaves stay there, because they provide a host habitat for pollinators over the course of the year. And that is true of reeds as well. And it is a very, very important part to do. It's like in our community, we have a Love 'em or Leave 'em campaign by our village to convince people to, as the leaves fall in the fall, mulch them and push them into garden beds, or leave some on your lawn because they're natural nutrients. And that provides a much more effective environmental support system for our pollinators. So everyone's encouraged to join the pollinator pathway, not just those along the planned route. Even though we call it a pollinator pathway, it really can be a patchwork across the entire community. When I started the pollinator pathway down here in Irvington, I originally had conceived it by thinking of a pathway that works through our village that would be one I could point to. But I quickly realized that was not an effective tool, because people who were on the pathway that I had identified were, didn't want me to tell them what to do or not do in their property, so they were unhappy. People who were not on the pathway thought, well, I'm not on the pathway, I'm not involved, so I'm not happy. And neither of that was true. The pollinator pathway is more a concept. It's thinking about making connections throughout your community, but everybody in the community has something to add to that. And everybody in your community, by doing things in your own yard or your own parks, can be supportive of this connected community, part of the broader patchwork of pathways that cut across and provide healthy environments for pollinators. And this is, I think, a really important thing. It's an idea shared across existing conservation organizations. One thing I have found about the pollinator pathway, and this is true in Connecticut, true in our community, is it becomes, I always like to say, it's like a gateway drug for a lot of environmental issues that people want to promote. But the pollinator pathway is something that I think people get. It's something that they can feel they can do in their own yard. You get direct results by seeing hopefully beautiful native plants and flowers, and you see the insects that come and feed on them. So it is a very engaging tool that is connected to sustainability issues, healthy yards, climate change, but it's all tied into creating a sustainable environment. And a good way to can show people how they can do that is through this pollinator pathway and getting people to start to understand the concepts of supporting pollinators and working on creating pollinator pathways through their communities. And so there's a shared website that Susan mentioned, pollinator-pathway.org. I encourage you to go look at this website. It's kind of the umbrella for the Northeast Pollinator Pathway Project. Each town can have a page, contribute information. Events are listed for all towns. You can order yard signs, are available for order. But more importantly, there's shared resources, handouts, best practices for removing invasives, tips for planting containers, creating gardens and meadows, alternative to pesticides, where to buy natives, and more importantly, there's kind of a starter kit for how to get these a pollinator pathway project going in your own community. There's a lot of good resources there. There's members of the steering committee for pollinator pathway can be available to answer questions, provide support, and kind of give practices that have worked or not worked in their own communities. So it's a great resource to have and for you to turn to. There's a number of handouts to download and print on this website. I encourage people to take a look at that. There's native plant lists. There's best trees for pollinators. There's alternatives to pesticides, procedures to repel ticks, all kinds of booklets and that you are available that you can kind of get for free. And as I said, you can order signs. This is a sign that kind of we provide. I have some in my yard. I have next to my native plants. And there's a number of people in our community who now have these signs up around the yard. And it's a great way of getting people to see pollinator friendly gardens, and they start talking about what's that all about. It kind of gets the conversation going. It's a very effective tool. So questions about this, and you can contact Susan at HECT, or you can contact me. And so that's a little bit of a background. So let me just finish. Let me stop sharing for a second, and I will finish with just a little bit of insight about how I got this started here in our community, and a couple of things that worked and didn't work. And as I said, I stopped practicing law in 2016. And in 2017, I was asked to take over a nascent land trust, a land conservancy in our village that had been started and it was kind of dead on the vine. And I got involved with that and was looking for ways of creating community engagement. And I spoke to folks at the Westchester Land Trust, and they said, oh, there's this pollinator pathway project that has proven very effective in Connecticut. It seems to be a great way of engaging communities and getting messages out there. And I said, well, I'll do that. I'll try that. What the hell? And so I tried to identify in our community groups that would be potentially interested in this, both within the village, local garden club, the rec department, some local churches, a green policy task force that had been created by the committee. And I started talking to them and just talking about this idea and how we can make it work in our community. And we launched it. And in the 3 years it's been going on, it's grown substantially. It's grown not just in our community of Irvington, but across all the river towns. And there are now active pollinator pathway projects that we coordinate with in Hastings, in Yonkers, in Dobbs Ferry, in Ardsley, in Terrytown, Sleepy Hollow, Nyack, and then throughout all of Westchester. And it's a great way of getting connected up in hearing about ideas that work or don't work across different communities. So it was interesting when I started this, there was some initial pushback. Initially, our Parks Department was concerned that, they didn't know who the hell I was. And so they thought I was just some crazy guy. I had this idea and I wanted to plant a bunch of gardens in the parks that they then would be responsible for taking responsibility of maintenance for. And I said, no, that's not what I'm trying. I'm trying to educate people and talk about these issues. And hopefully we can put this in our parks. But I'm not trying to make you change something at starting off. We had a beautification committee in our community that had for many years had planted window boxes up and down our main street. And they were very concerned that this project was going to be tearing out all these annuals that they loved and planting native plants, which they described to be weeds, and is going to cause all kinds of discomfort in our community. And you got to deal with that. And I think what's happened is that over the last 3 years, as more and more people have become involved and people understand the issues, those groups have come around. Now the village heavily promotes what we do, and every time we do a talk, it's up on the village website. It's talked about. The Parks Department is now fully behind what we're doing and are engaged through, again, the O'Hara Nature Center we have. But this whole idea is still, it's kind of ground up. And so it should reflect what each of your communities, the resources each of your communities have, and they bring to it. There's no one model to make this work. You look to see what are the resources that you have, whether it's parks, whether it's the CAC, whether it's the village itself, the town itself, whether it's churches, clubs, or whatever. How do they get involved and how can they support this effort? And I think that's been a great way of doing things. Some of our local communities have started their own websites. They've started demonstration gardens. That's been a great way of engaging people. Here in Irvington, we have started 4 or 5 demonstration gardens, one by the Friends of the Library up at the O'Hara Nature Center, and then at some private homes, and one of our churches has started a demonstration garden. And that, again, has proven a great way of getting the word out. The old Croton Aqueduct cuts through a number of communities down here, running from the Croton River down to New York City. And we've engaged with the state park, the state park manager who runs that state park, it's a state park now, and got them involved with allowing adjacent homeowners to plant gardens and add their garden out into the state park a little bit. And it's a tremendously effective way for people who walk up and down the aqueduct to see these gardens, learn a little more about what the plants are and why they're important. So what was a kind of a small nascent group 3 years ago is now part and parcel of a much larger group of efforts across a broad swath of communities. And I think it's been a great way of getting our community involved, get our community focused on what is an important environmental concern and issue, but something that individual people can do in their own yard and feel engaged with, feel that they're accomplishing something. And that, I think, is a great draw for people to come in and to be involved. So it's kind of my pitch. I don't know if there's questions. I'm more than pleased to answer questions that people might have. So
we're gonna take questions in just a minute. Thank you
Okay.
very much. That was amazing. Before we do that, I'm gonna just add a little bit of information about what's going on locally. So those of us here in Dutchess County can just have a sense of that. And then between Pam and me, we'll deal with, there were several questions in the chat and other people might want to raise their hand. I'm gonna also just go ahead and share my screen. This is the Town of Poughkeepsie page on the Pollinator Pathway website. You'll see this looks just like the main page, and some towns have gotten an independent page. We're not at that point yet, but the Pathway set this sort of standard one up for us, and we're very appreciative. And I just want to show you, that's our beautiful new logo, a couple things. First of all, we have a lot of partners. I want to talk about them in just a minute. My goal initially when I started this project, I looked at the toolkit that the Pathway provided, And it suggested that we get a steering committee, which is where I started, which has succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. This whole thing has been really crossing municipal boundaries, just like the bees do. Just to give you a sense of who's involved locally, we have 4 school districts that lie within the town of Poughkeepsie or overlap the town of Poughkeepsie: Spackenkill, Wappingers, Hyde Park, and Arlington. 3 of those actually also overlap other towns in the county. And because the teachers and the students all live in different places, there has already been an organic growth of that in that way. We also have Oakwood Friends School, which is here in Spackenkill, involved. And the teachers, I know there's at least one of them here tonight. The teachers, especially in the middle and high school, the science faculty and environmental club people, are often running and doing incredible work in conjunction with the people at the Vassar College Environmental Cooperative. I know they're already having Google Meets with their students, and they're planning in-person activities together, when that's feasible, and working on seed propagation and all their kinds of things. So that is just off and running. The local colleges are also involved. In addition to the cooperative at Vassar, we have a fabulous geography student at Vassar College who has created an interactive map for us, which is linked here on the site. I'm just going to show you. Can you guys see that map? I hope. I changed to a different page. I think you can still see it. Pam, you can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is our map, which we are now making available to all the towns in Dutchess County. Anyone can use this if they want to. So just for example, this little purple flower here is actually my house. And when you click on the flower, it gives some information. There's a couple of pictures, my vegetable garden or my flower garden. So we have this map, and there is a link on our site to join, and you can get yourself on the map that way, and you can look at the map, and it's going to be really fun to see the pathway start to develop as we connect the green spaces. We have Dutchess Community College involved. We have Marist involved, and Lori, I know you're here. We'd like to have Bard involved now, and of course Bard does not overlap the town, but this is now going to be wider than just Poughkeepsie. Marist, as I said, is involved with their sustainability committee. We also have Friends of Peach Hill Park, which is the main park for the town of Poughkeepsie. They're getting involved. There were some pictures on the map already from them. The Waterman Bird Club, I know that we have people here tonight from the Waterman Bird Club who've been helping us. Our county legislator, I know we have Rebecca Edwards here tonight. She's supporting this effort and has an incredible idea about pollinator gardens in the local parks with a memorial component. So the list is really extensive. There are a few other towns. If you look at the pathway and you go here and where it says New York Pathways, there are a few other towns within Dutchess County that are in this list. The ones that are blue are links, the ones that are black are not. And what I did was I have reached out to find people in those towns in Dutchess County that are already listed here. Most of those connections were not through the CACs, but each person that I've spoken to, I've asked them to reach out to the municipality to get the CACs connected, on behalf of the town. And next week, a lot of us are going to be at the annual CAC round table hosted by the Dutchess County Environmental Management Council. We're going to talk about it then, and we are using the CAC list serve to get this word out. We can all kind of move forward with this in whatever way works for our own locality, but I do hope that through the EMC, we'll be able to have a sort of loose collaboration and stay in touch with each other so that, we can share ideas and know what the other neighbors are doing. Something I definitely really want to do is reach out to the local nurseries to encourage them to provide native plants for sale and to hopefully put some educational material out that we might give to them. And I know there's, as Chet said, starting to be a lot of demand for that. And I know I was at the Adams garden show last week, and they had a whole table with information about native plants. So there is, I put my own email, I'll put my own email in the chat. I also put earlier in the chat a Gmail that I set up for this purpose, which is also on our page. And it's just, it's taken off. And I wanted you guys to also see sort of in person, so you can get a sense of the size. This is my Pollinator Pathway medallion that I bought. It's about 6 inches across, that I bought to put in my yard this year. And you can get them from the site, and you make a small donation, and it supports the work. We wanted to sell them through the town, but it got really complicated. So if you want to get one, please just get one from the Pathway. So Pam, do you want to start? I know there were some questions in the chat. You want to maybe?
Yeah, we'll start going through the questions that y'all posted in the chat. We're gonna start with whoever is from the Clinton CAC. The list of native plants can be very overwhelming to our local residents. Is it possible to come up with a starter list of more common native plants that our residents can look for? And also, Charles, I just want to thank you so much. That was really an outstanding presentation. And Susan, really, thank you again for your enormous initiative on this. It's been
My favorite project.
No, it's wonderful. So Charles, I'm thinking maybe you're going to point her in the direction of the Pollinator website, which I've been on, and you've got some tremendous resources there.
Yeah, so let me, this question is something that I suffer from as well. Like, I look at long lists of Latin words of native plants, and I don't know what plants are which or whatever. And so it's sometimes hard to differentiate that. There are, however, a number of good, effective lists that, an important thing to think about as you're thinking about what native plants to buy is thinking about a couple of things that are very important. One is where you're going to plant them, shady or sun, because that really makes a difference what plants you at a very basic level. Two, as you think about planting plants, you want to find plants that bloom over different times of the season, so they provide an ongoing source of food to insects starting from spring and through the fall. It's also helpful to have different plants that are at different heights, because that often attracts pollinators a certain way. So thinking about, as you're looking at plants, those are some basic components. And on the website, there are several lists of native plants in graphical form that show when their bloom time is over the season and different heights. One of the other challenges I had is that, I don't know, I assume up there, down here we have a lot of deer. And the first year I planted native plants in my yard, the next day the deer came to my door and knocked on my door to say thank you for planting those plants, because they could then eat them all immediately. I was really unhappy. So thinking about planting deer-resistant plants, or at least plants that are less interesting to the deer, is an important thing to do. And again, on the website, there are a couple of good lists of deer-resistant native plants. Another thing to do is to look for, there's a really great guidebook by Kate Brandis about how to create small pollinator gardens. And I think it's available on the website. And if not, I can send a link to Susan and she can spread it around. But it was a project done in Lackawanna County in Pennsylvania, where Kate, for a couple of years, designed small little sites around mailboxes, around corners of houses, and she has some plant designs that are very helpful and very good. So I agree. And the final thing I do is I go to somebody smarter than me who knows more about plants, and I say, I got to plant some plants. You got any good ideas? Where's a good starter kit for that? And that's often a helpful way to get started. So those are some of my ideas.
I also wanted to mention, because you mentioned the Doug Tallamy book, and some people here know, our local public library is in the middle of having a whole series, a workshop series based on his book. The name of the book, Lorraine, I know you're here, help me, the name of the book.
Oh, I
Um,
wrote it down is bringing
Oh.
nature home.
Bringing Nature Home.
Yeah.
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 They're doing a whole series on the Doug Talley book, so I think that it's getting
The
quite.
Nature's Best Hope is the
Nature's
current
Best
book.
Hope, right?
Oh.
That one. He's got a couple of books, so that was a great suggestion too. But I think there are quite a few people who have become aware of his books as a result of that library workshop.
All right, great. Now we have the next question is how important is it to get rid of invasive plants before planting native plants? Where can we get help with how to effectively plant around our house?
Okay, so invasive plants are called invasive plants because they tend to be very aggressive and tend to take over the space and crowd out native plants. And so if you have, depending which ones you have, but if you have some invasive plants in your yard and you just plant some native plants, it's hard for them to compete because often plants, perennial native plants, take a year or two to get their root system in place and to really strengthen themselves to be able to flourish. And if while that's going on, these more invasive plants push them out, rob nutrients from the soil, and take light away from them, it's very hard. So it is much more effective if you can to remove the native plants as much as you can, and that's hard because native plants, they often have rhizomes that whereby they have root systems underground where they'll reappear constantly, no matter what you try to do. They'll keep coming back. And so you have to be persistent. So like when I created my garden, I went out and took out what were several invasive plants that had been planted there for years and that people thought they were the greatest things since sliced bread. I removed them, planted my native plants, and I've had to then maintain that over time. So it is an important step to do. It's an ongoing battle back and forth, but that's the way you're going to allow your native plants to flourish.
Excellent. And our next question is, what is a tick box?
So tick boxes are, you could find them on the web. What they usually are a small 5 or 7 inch box that has bait that attracts mice to walk into them or other rodents that carry ticks. And then within the box, there is often a wax that the mice or rodents rub against. And that wax is a certain ingredient that kills ticks. Doesn't harm the mice, doesn't harm the rodents, but by going into these boxes, looking for the bait and walking out, they've exposed themselves that will hurt the ticks. And so it's probably not the solution to all the ticks that are around, but it is one way of tackling them that doesn't involve pesticides. As I said, another way of that's what tick boxes are. And if you look them up, there's a consumer reports about different tick boxes and how they work, and that's probably a good way of finding out about them.
Excellent. And also, could you define what a snag is? Because I don't think everyone knows what a snag is.
I'm not sure I can define it either. I'm not sure.
I think I can.
Okay.
Which is,
good.
I learned this actually from Sue Iannucci in her presentation to us with the Waterman Club, which is basically it's a dead tree, and that you just leave it up, and birds love it, you know, and I guess insects and pollinators do as well. So, so that's that. Next one is, does the pollinator pathway support native cultivars?
Yes, although that is a big debate. There are purists who say cultivars because their cultivars are bad, and that what you really should be doing is absolutely non-cultivar native plants. And I'm not a purist necessarily. I'm not sophisticated enough to be a purist, I guess. So I have planted native plant cultivars, which are cultivated variations of native plants. But so there is a debate about that. There is actually an interesting part of this is that there is a project called the Ecotype Project, which is focused on identifying and preserving seed crop of really native plants that grew in our regions and ensuring that. And they're very particular about finding non-cultivar versions of native plants to become the seed base like that. And so, because they really are the ones that thrive here, and while some cultivars, many native plant cultivars will support insects, those biological changes that result from the cultivation will sometimes affect that food chain. So that's what it is.
If I may add a comment, I attended a wonderful workshop on pollinators last week through the Westchester Community College Native Plant Center, and this specific issue was addressed, and it was new to me, very interesting. And they showed a chart kind of going along a continuum from urban, the most urban to the most rural, and from, as you go from urban to rural, they recommended the cultivars in an urban setting where they're likely to take more wear and tear, be maybe in heat from the cement and so forth, as being hardier. But as you go out into a more rural setting, to get more into the generic type of native plant, which will have a better chance of survival and of sort of seeding itself. So that was new to me. I never heard of cultivars before. And so, and also on the Ecotype project, because I know we went to a session with them through you. Vassar Cooperative is getting involved in that too, I think, and is going to be doing some seed work. So that's something that's happening here as well.
Yeah, sometimes cultivars, they're as Susan suggested, they're often focusing on sometimes the root systems, strengthening the root systems or changing the amount of moisture they need to survive. And so those elements may not change their ability to support pollinators, but they make a cultivar more effective in a certain a drier environment, a harsher environment, and whatever. And sometimes that's very helpful.
Okay, then we have the question, and actually we can ask Charles about this and actually open it up if anybody else has answers to this. What experience has anyone had with encouraging municipalities in changing mowing practices in parks, etc.? I don't know, Charles, can you speak to that at all?
Well, so our community, which is a fairly mature community, we don't have large swaths, we don't have highways, and we don't have large areas. We have parks, and we've talked to the community about taking parts of those parks and not mowing them so they're not big lawn spaces. There's a lot of demand for open space for ball fields and stuff like that. So there's a constant tension that way. I think some of the communities up in northern Westchester where there is more open space, and often communities are mowing along the edges of long roadways that are more country roads. That's where there's been more success in getting them to change mowing practices. I've seen it. One of the things we do as part of our project is try to work with golf courses and think about changing practices at golf courses, which are large open spaces and are driven by very specific needs within the playing fields as well. But there's other parts of the golf courses where different practices come into play. And we've demonstrated that golf courses can save a lot of money by not mowing as much and still develop a beautiful landscape and can be very supportive of pollinators. And so often the pitch to municipalities, depending upon how much they mow, you can save a lot of money by not doing it, and you're not, it just, again, sometimes it's a change of aesthetics. People, look at a roadway that has a number of wildflowers on it. That looks like a weedy place or stuff like that, but it's actually a very healthy environment.
Thank you. And then there's also a question, again, I don't know if you have specific experience to speak to this. Can a landowner offer a site, excuse me, for a gardening group to establish a pollinator garden? I guess that's a issue of private ownership versus
Again, I think
public space. Yeah.
So I think anybody, if they want to ask a garden club to come in and build a pollinator garden in their yard, that's great.
Yeah.
You got to think about why you're doing that. Are they going to build it for you, just for you, or are they going to make it open to the public? So there's nothing counter to that
Mhm.
by any means, but whether I can convince my garden club to come in and work on my yard, they tell me to go pound sand. So they would say, no, do it yourself. So, but it may be that you can do it, maybe not in your own yard, but there could be like in Dobbs Ferry down here. Dobbs Ferry has this incredible program where they have adopt a park or adopt a corner,
Mhm.
where the village has these kind of little corners of grass and whatever along sidewalks that are kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they get local people to say, I'll adopt that and I'll do something with it and take on that responsibility, and that they can transform that into more of an area that can support native plants, and it becomes an added attribute for the community. That's an effective place where I've seen that kind of concept work.
That's excellent.
Another idea for someone who really has some space to offer, again, something we learned about from the Ecotype project, is the concept of what they call a founder's plot, which is a whole row, if you will, of a certain kind of plant that is being grown specifically for seed harvesting. They call it a founder's plot, and they were talking about on the edges of farms, for example, where there is land that is not being used for the crops, but it is, available, asking farmers to do that. So that might, if you had a property, with a lot of space, that's something that you could offer to host, I'm sure. Would be incredible.
Also, our next question, we have, how many plants need to be planted to be included on the pathway?
Well, I would say a single plant planted is a net benefit. But I like to encourage people to plant a range of plants, because that's what really will support the concept of providing a healthy environment for pollinators. I'll give you an example of how this issue played out in our community. Susan showed you the signs. And so when we thought about, we have this sign, and if people want to put it in their yard to demonstrate that they're supporting this concept and doing this, what do they have to do to justify getting a sign? Do they have to commit to plant a certain number of plants? Do they have to swear on their Bible they're never going to use any pesticides? Are they going to have to rip out every invasive plant that they've ever seen? And from practice in communities, some communities have tried to come up with a pledge where someone says, I commit to doing X, Y, and Z. And they found that often very ineffective. People were not excited about signing pledges that way. And so one thing we did was we decided to make it kind of an invitation. To get our signs, we invited people to participate in these efforts by planting native plants, by not using pesticides and whatever, and not making it very non-judgmental. And so different people do things at their own pace. People learn at their own pace. People have time and limited amount of time. And so I think I found for myself that it's probably more constructive to be supportive and encouraging people to try things, and not say, oh, if you don't do this much, it's not enough. Because every little bit helps, and every little bit educates people and gets them engaged. And that, I think, is a net positive.
Yeah, I think the one thing I contribute, being, the on again, off again gardener that I am. But I was reading something recently in regard, even it's like a gardening thing, but apparently it's a pollinator thing too. It's like, if you're going to put a plant in, particularly if it's a perennial, say, it's helpful if you make a little patch of it, like say 2 or 3 in one shot, because it gives more of, I think, a visual target to the particular pollinator than one single plant. So that's just like,
I think it's true. And something else I mentioned, one thing, if you're really trying to support pollinators, you're trying to put in plants that bloom over different times of the season. So often, if you just plant one plant that blooms in the first 2 weeks in June,
right,
that's great, but that doesn't do anything for all the other months. So I think it is helpful to not just put a single plant in, but think about adding 4 or 5 plants that bloom at different times across the season, that maybe are slightly different heights, and that will provide a more supportive environment to pollinators throughout the spring and the fall and the summer.
Excellent. And then we have the question, do you have any suggestions on how to approach a conversation with your neighbors who may be using pesticides on their property and may impact your garden?
Well, that's a sensitive issue. A lot of it's just how well you know your neighbors and how much they want to hear from you, proselytizing to them about the good or bad. I think, way I have done it is I try to talk about what I'm doing, not so much what they're doing wrong, but what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it. And I think that is at least for me, and I just know if somebody came to me, if my neighbor came to me and looked at me and said, oh, what you're doing is stupid, this is wrong, it's not going to be a very effective way for encouraging me to change my behavior. So again, there's no one solution. A lot of it's dynamics in your neighborhood. But I think talking about what you're doing and why you think it's a great idea, and not, instead of saying what you're doing over there is wrong, is a more effective tool.
Yeah, that's got to be a sensitive issue, especially when
Yeah,
we're
it's hard.
living in amongst each other. So I think I have gone through the questions in the chat. I know there was a question about local resources for native plants. And I think a lot of people responded to that question. So if you all want to just go up through the chat and pick those different things out, because I feel like I saw at least 5 or 6 different sources, and if anybody knows of any additional ones that aren't listed there, you can raise your hand and chime in or put it in the chat. I don't know, does anybody else have any questions that they would like to bring up?
You can raise your hand or use the hand raise feature in Zoom. I'm just checking the screens
Yeah.
for any of that.
So let me leave one other point. Just again, one thing I like to think of what I do and what the steering committee does is kind of an open source for people about information. And so if people have questions or wonder how to find something or whatever, I encourage you just to email me. I don't want to be inundated with thousands of emails necessarily. I get those a lot, but I do think is one thing that's valuable is offering what each of us learned to everybody else, and it's a great way of getting the conversation going. And there's a lot of smarter people than I am, know more about this than I do. And often, if you ask me a question, I'll point you to somebody else who might have the answer. But I feel free to do that, or reach out through Susan, and whatever I can do to help your efforts, I'd be more than pleased to do.
Thank you. And again, I really am interested. Any of you in other towns in Dutchess, I would really like to know what you're doing so that we can really, have an awareness of how we're collaborating, share the map, share the resources. So please let us know. You can find me through the CAC. You can find me through the email that's on our page. Through the CAC listserv. Lots of people here know me, so we're very easy to find. It looks like some of you are finding each other tonight, which is what we want.
All right, so if we do not have any additional questions, then I want to really sincerely thank Charles Kerr for an outstanding presentation. I think I'm just seeing a slew of positive comments in the chat. It was really informative, a ton of great information, well communicated. And also, again, I have to Susan Carnes-Heck, who made this entire thing happen. It's amazing, and congratulations. So this is super exciting. It's a way to bring the entire county and county environs together in something really positive and wonderful for all of us. So let's all stay in touch, and thank you all so much for coming. Our workshop series is always on at least until through June, and maybe we'll extend it beyond then, but until June, it is on Tuesday nights, the fourth Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. You can reuse the Zoom link for it. And next month it will be on composting. We would love to see you again because God knows you need compost for your garden. So
And
thank
I have saved the entire chat at this point. I've downloaded it, so all of those links and everything, I will be able to get them, and we'll figure out to put them on our CAC page or something.
absolutely. And again, thank you all so much for coming. And Charles, thank you so much. And Susan.
Thank you, Chet.
And
Thank you.
everyone have a lovely evening.
My pleasure.
Take
Thanks.
care. Happy
Bye-bye.
gardening.
Thank you.